Hey everybody, I'm nutritionist Dr. Mike Purcell, and welcome to this episode of the Dr. Mike Show, where today we're going to unpack the strong, fit, and healthy life philosophy. All right, let's get into the strong, fit, and healthy life philosophy. So strong, fit, and healthy life was something that I came up with maybe 5-6 years ago as a way of saying, what are we doing this for? So much of my work early on in nutrition was all centered around weight loss. That's what people wanted information on. They wanted to lose weight. And what I found is after we got out kind of working with people and helping individuals, that weight loss was lacking from a goal perspective, because once you lose the weight, then what are you doing it for, right? You need to find something else. And I found this to be a big stumbling point for many people, that they would focus and perseverate and really hone in on the goal that they wanted to achieve, this weight loss goal. But then once they achieved that goal, then there was a gap, kind of like a professional athlete who then retires, their whole life dedicated to one thing. And then you're like, well, now what do I do? And so I found that people were struggling with the same thing with regards to nutrition and exercise, that I would help them put together this plan. They would put the plan into action. They would lose the weight, and then they would think, okay, now what are we doing next, right? And it took a little bit for them to figure out why they were eating healthy and exercising beyond just losing weight. And so the strong, fit, and healthy life came as that thing. Like, we could be doing this to lose weight, but we're also doing this because we want to lead a strong, fit, and healthy life. And those phrases, those words come together for that phrase has really come to mean a lot to me and a lot to the clients that I worked with, because it embodied the reason behind what we were doing. That this wasn't about caloric restriction and increase in activity for the sake of creating a caloric deficit, but it was looking at something bigger. So let's unpack this strong, fit, and healthy life a little bit. So first, you think of strong. I want to go through today's show, and we'll unpack kind of word by word. So we'll look at strong and what does that mean? We'll look at fit, and then we'll also look at healthy, and then how we incorporate that into our lives. So the strong thing is actually pretty interesting, because one of my more recent books was entitled Strength the Field Manual. And we'll link up the PDF for the book in the show notes. You can also get it at mikepurcell.com. You can download the PDF as well. And I wrote this for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And as we were brainstorming this idea, we thought there's beef, protein, strength, physical strength, muscle. That makes sense, right? But there's got to be, it's the same question I was asking with strong, fit, and healthy life. Like, there's got to be more than that, right? Because not everybody is so obsessed or so into strength. Like, what else is there? And so it really began for me this multi-year journey, which, even as often as, or as soon as, this past spring, I was lecturing on these topics about looking beyond that and how we look at strength from a physical strength, cognitive strength, and then also like the social emotional strength. And then specifically when we look at nutrition, is how does nutrition, or how to create a nutritional plan that actually checks all those boxes. So how do we create a nutrition plan that sets us up to be strong physically, right? And so from a protein perspective, this is super easy. Now you can also get, as I mentioned, you can get Strength the Field Manual. It's totally free. The book, you can download it, and you'll get all this plus recipes and a lot more details. But this idea of strength, protein is the centerpiece of physical strength from a nutrition perspective, right? But I think that strength is also one of the most important things that we can work to develop over time. Because if you look at muscular strength as we get older, it becomes a stronger and stronger predictor of reductions in mortality rates, reductions in falls, reductions in fractures, and all these things shorten our lifespan. Now, I was just on the podcast with Mike Robertson. He invited me on his show in his podcast, and we talked a lot about protein. But one of the things that we talked about was this idea of a catabolic crisis. And so this is why strength is so important. So Dr. Doug Patton Jones, who I've written about before. He passed away recently. He was one of the greatest protein researchers ever, and he's too humble to ever admit that. But he really revolutionized a lot of the ways and provided evidence for a lot of the thought processes around muscle protein synthesis and how protein impacts muscle. So Doug had this theory, where he said, well, most of the time we talk about muscle loss and we think about it happening linearly as we get older. So the older you get, the more muscle you lose. But that life doesn't really work like that. But that what happens is you're going along, you get injured, right? You're lifting something and you tear your bicep, or you pull your hamstring really bad. And then you're inactive for a set amount of time. So all of a sudden you lose a bunch of lean body mass. And then you get back to your normal life again once you recover, but you never go back to where you were before. Something else happens. You lose more muscle mass, and then you keep going, and then something else happens. So it's not this linear piece, but they're these what he called catabolic crises, right? These flexion points in our lives, which we become sedentary due to injury, and depending how long we have to be sedentary, right, is going to be directly proportional to the amount of muscle that we have the potential to lose. And we just never regain that muscle. And so it's hard, especially the older you get, it's really hard to build muscle. So you really need the idea behind focusing on strength and maintaining muscle in our diets is less about how to bodybuild, but more about preparing ourselves for when we hit these catabolic crises later in life, so that we have as much muscle mass as possible to deal with the potential muscle loss that's going to happen. And if we can optimize our nutrition during these times where we have to be sedentary, so maybe it is a hamstring injury, but our nutrition stays on point and we're still also working the upper body, right? So for example, it was probably 4 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, I tore my hamstring. I was unofficially auditioning to be the dad of the year. We were at a Ninja Warrior gym, and the kids wanted me to run up the warped wall, and nobody could make it up the warped wall. And so I was like, well, I'm obviously going to, get up this warped wall or die. And so, went from standing watching to dead sprint up the warped wall, totally tore my hamstring, made it to the top, and accepted, the cheer from the children, walked down, and then persisted to limp around for several weeks after that as my hamstring healed. But one of the things that was in my mind going on in this, other than I was pretty happy I made it up the warped wall, was that I knew if I was going to be inactive or have a decrease in activity on my lower body due to the hamstring injury, I needed to make sure my protein intake stayed extra diligent with that, getting protein at every single meal. But then I also needed to find ways to get conditioning and work my upper body so I could help maintain strength in other areas of my body that weren't hindered. So for me, the ski erg ended up being a lifesaver because, after the first week or so, I could stand and I could use the ski erg without too much of that hamstring pain. But I still got a great cardiovascular workout, still got great upper body workout, and I was able to still train, did some unilateral stuff with my left leg. I also did a lot of upper body training, so great excuse to train upper body. But in that case, was using this idea of here's this catabolic crisis, but what can I do to prevent muscle loss during this time period and to avoid that, so that if it happens again, my baseline for this catabolic crisis is going to be higher. So aiming, as always, to maintain as much lean body mass as possible. So from a strength perspective, when we talk about a strong, fit, and healthy life, part of it is literal physical strength, because physical strength is a superpower. I truly believe it, that being strong is not something you're going to regret. And so working to maintain and foster that strength is very important. The other thing from a strength perspective, as I mentioned, is cognitive. Now, there's so many things we can do nutritionally to help strengthen our minds. I believe I've talked about on the show before, the mind diet. I know I was actually just emailing this morning with someone who had sent me a question about the Mediterranean diet. asking if that was a good diet for cognition and cognitive health because it had been recommended to them. And I think the Mediterranean diet has some great research behind it, showing associations with various improvements from a mental perspective. But one of the diets I really love is the MIND diet, which is basically you take a Mediterranean diet, you take a DASH diet, and you bring them together. DASH diet, a little bit more low-fat dairy, probably even a greater emphasis on fruits and vegetables, and also some lean proteins. And, mix that with the Mediterranean diet, which is going to be a slightly higher fat diet. So a lot more olive oil. So in the MIND diet, which is a mixture of these two, what you get is one of the rules or one of the tenets of the MIND diet is to use olive oil as your primary oil. While the Mediterranean diet as a class, Mediterranean diet is sort of broad and nondescript and amorphous, because how could you take the entire Mediterranean region and capture those dietary patterns, right? They're very different. But one of the things that does sustain across this is the use of olive oil or plant-based oils as the primary oils. So extra virgin olive oil should be your primary oil that you use in your diet, from cooking, from adding to salads, vegetables, or cooking with it perspective. Extra virgin olive oil is where it's at. And the Predimed study was this large long-term study looking at some key nut intake versus extra virgin olive oil usage. And really those two things were shown to be major drivers of long-term health. So olive oil being a key oil in the diet and something that you should use your primary oil. It's something that I definitely use as the primary oil in my diet as well. Back to sorry, got a little tangent on my love for olive oil. With the MIND diet and the Mediterranean diet, these are ways that we can use nutrition to strengthen our minds. And so this impact of nutrition and cognition is really there just as much as we think of nutrition and performance. We really need to start thinking about nutrition and cognition. Alzheimer's disease is called by some people as type 3 diabetes due to the links between consistent and persistent elevated blood sugar levels and dementia and Alzheimer's disease. I've spent a fair amount of time in the supplement space, developed the Nutein, which is a combination of a patented spearmint and marigold extract. That those two things have 12 human clinical trials showing that this compound that is in Nutein, the extract of the spearmint and the marigold together, improve a variety of factors, both short and long term, for cognitive health. Neurocoffee. As many of you know, you're drinkers of Neurocoffee, if you watch the show, that we've basically taken coffee, something that so many of us love, and added specific antioxidants from the coffee fruit, coffee being a cherry. Usually the flesh fruit part is thrown away and just the bean is kept, and that's what we make coffee with. But what we put inside of Neurocoffee is we take antioxidants from that whole fruit, and they've been shown in 2 different human clinical studies to boost brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And BDNF has been called miracle grow for the brain. It's a factor that's used to help grow and repair neurons that, unfortunately, as we get older, our body produces less of it. As we're stressed, our body produces less of it. As we eat more sugar and kind of have a worse diet, our body produces less of it. And so Neurocoffee specifically I developed to push back against a lot of these factors that we're running into with modern life, to help support BDNF production in our brains by just drinking a cup of coffee every day. And so these, there are just such clear ways that we can strengthen our minds through nutrition. And so part of the strong, fit, and healthy life is, yes, physical strong, but it's also cognitive strong. And so as we move on, how can we be strong now, today, mentally? So when I'm sitting down, I'm going to be able to be focused and productive and make all those neurological connections I need, but also how in 50 years can I also be cognitively strong? And I think that you can make nutritional decisions on a day-to-day basis, just like being physically strong. You make decisions on a meal-by-meal basis that are going to help you now and in the future. Same thing goes for your mental health and how nutrition can impact the mental side of the equation. It's super powerful. Now, the last piece from a strength perspective that we want to talk about with food and nutrition and also fitness is the social emotional aspect, that there's so much that's good about food that brings people together. And there's so much about fitness that can be really good that brings people together. One of the comments, we hosted a Chad 1000X event, that I mentioned this a couple times on the show, up here in Webster, New York. And my friend Pete, he said to me afterwards, one of the things that he forgot and that he had missed so much about being involved with a CrossFit box on a week by week basis, we had it up at CrossFit Recourse in Webster, New York, was the camaraderie and the community around it, that people were there cheering each other on. People who were coming in and taking a little bit longer, but they were giving it their effort, that people didn't stop and leave. Everybody who had finished got around and cheered people on and helped support and motivate them. And that's so important, both from a fitness perspective, but then if you also think of a nutrition perspective, so much, especially if the lens you're looking at nutrition through is solely based on weight loss, it becomes very restrictive. And you then start taking away experiences that you would have socially because you're putting these guardrails on your food. And if we then look and say, well, actually, how can I experience the foods that I'm eating in a great social environment as well, it becomes really enriching. The data on family meals for adolescents and teens is pretty clear cut. The more sit-down family meals adolescents and teens can participate in, right, the better health outcomes they're going to have, lower risky behaviors they're going to participate in. It's really important. And I think the same goes for adults, especially now. There's been a lot more isolation in the last year or so from COVID perspective, from the way that technology is starting to function, that how often are we going out and just sharing a meal together? I think that's such a core piece of humanity. And when you think about your nutrition and how you want to eat, to live, to be healthy, engaging socially with food should be a positive and something that you should strive to do, where it's oftentimes seen as a negative because of overcaloric consumption or ultra processed foods and all sorts of social pressures. But you can create an environment where those things aren't the driving forces, where the camaraderie is the driving force. And if you do that, that's really the cheat code. And so if you think about strength in a strong, fit, and healthy life, the social emotional strength and what comes from sharing meals with people, cooking meals with people, that's probably thought of the least, but is really one of those almost intangible factors that'll help take everything up to a whole other notch that you wouldn't be otherwise able to achieve. So with looking at that strong, fit, and healthy life, when we look at strength specifically in the strong part, we're talking about physical strength, we're talking about cognitive strength, but we're also talking about strengthening relationships and using food and fitness to strengthen relationships with people. And we know that that's going to help improve our overall mood, feeling, happiness, and thus our overall health. So next, let's talk about the fit part of a strong, fit, and healthy life. So when we talk about the fit part, I sent an email to the NX Nutrition email list. So if you're on the email newsletter list, you would have gotten this last week. If you're not on the email list, I don't know what's wrong with you. No. You can go to microcell.com, sign up for free there. The Nutrition NX list, it's your prescription for good health, comes out once or twice a week. That's how you get the emails about the show. But I'm also starting to pepper in some other emails. But in that, I talk about the exercise template, or how I positioned it as the minimum dose of exercise, because oftentimes people are wondering, well, how much do I need to exercise? And so much of this, like nutrition, depends on what your goal is. Like, I can't tell you, someone would say, oh, is this a good food? Should I eat this food? I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, what's the underlayer of your health, what are the other foods that you're eating. And the same thing goes for exercise. Like, is running good? Like, it could be. Running could also be terrible. It depends what you like to do. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. So in the email that I sent out looking at the minimum dose of exercise, what I shared with everybody was this kind of 3-level approach or template that I like to view exercise through. That when you're looking to build an exercise program, I look at it at 3 different levels. And it's definitely a crawl, walk, run sort of approach. but they're additive. And so even if you're at the highest level, you still need to be checking those other boxes. So the first thing I like to do, 10,000 steps every day. I know recently there's actually been sort of a fair amount of controversy around that. This fall, there were a couple research papers that came out showing that 10,000 steps was not actually what you needed. You needed more like 7,000 steps every day, and that was that was really the health marker, and that this 10,000 steps every day actually just is more of a marketing thing that came from a Japanese company several decades ago when they were trying to get people to use pedometers. I will say that what's interesting is there was actually a fair amount of research on steps that came out this past year, and especially this past fall. And what it found was between, I want to say it was 6,000, it might have been 6,500 steps. But between that, like less than 7 range, like above like 6 to 7,000 step range, up to 10, that you got significant reductions in a variety of different chronic diseases when you kept walking more. So sure, 7,000 is good. Is 10,000 better? Definitely. Is 12,000 better? You're probably not going to regret walking an extra 2,000 steps. So I like to say 10,000 steps is where you want to go. But the thing to consider is how relative is it to your life? So on any given work day, if I come here down to my office and I'm sitting here and I'm working, I could take 2,000 steps. It could be 6 p.m. I'll look at my watch and it'll say I've taken 2,000 steps, right? That's just, I get into the work and I'm doing it and I don't move. And it's a terrible, unfortunate nature of sometimes being in deep work and kind of doing what I'm doing. So on those days, 6,000 steps is actually, I got to push for that. But my goal is always 10, because I know on an average day, I'm 7. On an average day, not like a sit at my desk, head down, work, look up and it's 5 o'clock kind of day. But on an average day, 7,000 steps. And if you compare year to year to year over the last, say, 4 years, I average 7,500 steps would be my average. And so going into 2022, one of the things that I decided was I really want to make an effort to hit 10,000 steps per day. And part of the reason was that, not that 10,000 was the magical number, but humans like nice round numbers, but it was because this was going to require deliberate increase in effort from me on a day-to-day basis. Like I was going to have to, because my step count had been the same for 2.5, 3 years. So I was literally going to have to change habits in order to make that happen. And one of the things that we don't appreciate oftentimes when we talk about steps is, yes, the steps are important, but if you're moving, that means you're not sedentary. And being sedentary is a huge issue too. And so how do we get up and move more? For me, needing to get that extra 2,500 steps, that was a huge driver to do that. So the baseline, 10,000 steps. I know 7,000 may be chic right now. Push yourself, shoot for 10. Level 2 is 150 minutes of exercise per week. I had an Instagram reel about this maybe a month or so ago, when someone had asked, how do I get started with exercise? It seems like everything on the internet is for the advanced person, right? And so level 2 is 150 minutes of moderate activity. So moderate activity is exercise that you can do while you're still talking. Like you could still talk. You're not out of breath, right? Or you don't have to pause and be like, hold on, right? You can still carry on a conversation, maybe even if it's a little stress for you to do that. But if you look at these 2 levels, and you can get in this 150 minutes a week anyway, doesn't matter, just get it in. These 2 levels, 10,000 steps and then level 2, 150 minutes of exercise per week, are totally exercise movement agnostic. This is not, you need a gym, you don't need a tonal, you don't need to go outside, you don't need to do anything. Like, just get it in. Well, to get in 10,000 steps, you're probably gonna need to get outside, but you don't have to. Like, there's no requirements. I feel like one of the things with exercise has become such big business that everyone's trying to sell you the next thing that you need to get in order to do your body right. In order to exercise, you need this band, or you need this sandbag, or you need this kettlebell, or you need this center mass bell, which is like a kettlebell but slightly different, or you need this barbell, or like there's always something you have to get. And so we can get caught up in like, well, I don't have the stuff, I don't have the right stuff. You don't need the right stuff. Levels 1 and 2 have nothing to do with equipment. You use whatever is around you, just get it in. When you move to level 3 of exercise, how I like to think about that is 3 resistance training workouts and at least 2 cardio workouts per week. So that gives you 5 relatively intensive sessions. Now, this is independent of your 10,000 steps, and there's also, this is going to help you accumulate that 150 minutes of exercise. But you don't have to go 5 days a week in the gym lifting weights in order to get great results. My good friend Joe Dowdell, who is, one of the best trainers that I've ever met, consistently would have clients work out 3 days a week, maybe 4 if they wanted to. But you can make such good progress towards your goals at 3 days a week if you're eating right and you're also sleeping in a good way, and then you sprinkle in that cardiovascular activity. I mean, we took someone and basically got them in such good shape. They were almost every single modeling picture when you went to the Under Armour website. And this was 3 days a week of resistance training and then interval training on top of that with a diet that was dialed in. So you don't have to be living in the gym. And so level 3 is 3 sessions, full body sessions ideally. It's just more efficient. And then you get in your cardiovascular activity. And that could be interval training. That could be some steady state cardio. Ideally, it's a mix of both. But when we look at the fit part of strong, fit, and healthy life, fitness is key because that's also going to help us thrive and live longer. And we're going to talk about health in just a second. But that's really a key piece because the cardiovascular system, our lungs, our heart, our vasculature, our insulin sensitivity, how our body responds to carbohydrates, so much of this is driven by our ability to go out and exercise and be active. And so fit is, I know that I'm a nutrition person, but the fitness aspect is so important and it goes hand in hand. People will oftentimes say, well, is it diet or exercise? This is it's a terrible question, but it's an ongoing debate, I will say, with weight loss. And if you had to pick one, you'd probably pick diet because it's so easy to eat that you could never exercise enough. But why pick one or the other? I mean, it's both. Like if you really wanted to pick the best plan for you and you wanted to make the best progress and be as healthy as possible, you would do both, diet and exercise. Full stop, end of story. So from a fitness perspective, see where you are on these different levels, right? Don't make it more complicated than you need to be. 10,000 steps, 150 minutes of moderate activity, 3 days of weightlifting, and 2 days of cardio, right? 1, 2, 3. Just go that way. Don't make it too complicated, and you're going to make a ton of progress towards this strong, fit, and healthy life. Now, the last part here is health. And I always think this is so important because we can get so caught up, especially talking with athletes, on performance goals that we forget about the health side of the equation. And what good is it if we can perform at this high level, but it becomes so detrimental to our health? I think it was over the weekend, I want to say it was the New York Times, ran an article. It was about bodybuilding, and it was basically a collection. It was a very sad article because it was basically a collection of people who died due to the practices of bodybuilding, right? And so much the huge health issue that most people run into from a bodybuilding perspective is the use of diuretics and the extreme dehydration, and then what can come out of that. And right there, you're like, well, here we're losing sight of what's happening here. There's the fit part, but we have to be healthy as well. And how do we create a nutrition program? And I understand if you're pushing the limits and you're literally trying to be the best in the world at what you do, there is going to be a point where you have to say, I'm choosing performance over health because I want to be the best in the world. But for most of us, we're not fine-tuning those dials that much. And we don't need to choose performance over health. And so we can choose both. Because think about the things we talked about from a strength perspective, with the strong part and the things we talk about with the fit part, really what these are doing is they're increasing our health span. So health span is distinctly different from lifespan. Lifespan is how long are we living, but health span is how long are we living free of chronic or debilitating disease. And for most of us, that's really what we're looking for is, yes, we can live till we're 80, but are we still fully functional and doing the things that we want to do at 80 years old, right? So how far can we live without chronic or debilitating disease? And for me, that's a great philosophical look at health. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. And we're going to do another show in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about some specific health markers, especially going into the new year, what that looks like for you and what you should be looking at. But know that all the things we talk about from a nutrition perspective on this show and all the things that you're going to read from me that I write, it all aligns physical performance and health together so that we're doing these things together. That it's not I'm making this choice for performance while health suffers, or I'm going to make this for health but performance suffers, right? It could go both ways. And so when we think about a strong, fit, and healthy life, the healthy part needs to fit both of those criteria, performance and health. That's why it's in there. So we're strong, fit, but we're also healthy. And we want to increase as much as possible our health span. And the last piece, life is really, you understand, like even if this is your first show, you know that my philosophy is we're in this for the long haul. I've been telling clients since 2005 probably that my goal, if you want to lose weight, my goal is to have you lose the weight but then never have to lose that weight again. Like if you want to lower your blood pressure, that we lower your blood pressure and it stays down, because we talked about in the last episode, the episode about just keep going, that if you change and you go back to what you were normally doing, guess what? Your blood pressure is going to go back up. You're going to gain the weight again. Your blood sugar is going to go back up. I mean, I had a client, we took him once, blood sugar 240, fasting blood sugar, consistently down to 130. Now, this is still on medication, but 240 to 130 is like, you can't even imagine. But what happens is if you stop doing the things that got you there, it's going to go back. Your blood sugar goes back. Your blood pressure goes back. The body weight goes back. Like you can't stop. We got to be in this for life. Right? And so that's the whole thing, strong, fit, and healthy life. So that's going to wrap it up for breaking down this strong, fit, and healthy life philosophy. So that when you hear me talk about a strong, fit, and healthy life, that's really what we're getting at. It's strength across 3 planes: physical strength, cognitive strength, and social emotional strength. It's fitness that's scalable across a variety of different levels, but you can get started at levels 1 or 2 or 3. They're additive, but you get started with no equipment, no nothing, just a decision to move more, and you're moving in the right direction. And from a health perspective, all the things that we're going to be doing and all the changes we're going to be making are not only going to improve our performance from a strong and a fit perspective, but they're also going to improve our health. That's really key too. And we're going to hack this and tweak this and make adjustments so that we're in this for our whole lives, and that we're not just doing this for 28 days. We're not just doing this for 6 weeks, but we're trying to create a foundational base that we can build off of to increase our health span. So that's really the strong, fit, and healthy life philosophy. I've been wanting to do this show for a long time. If you've seen the show, my kind of show index, I've been slowly moving this down because I wanted to have the time to prep to be able to talk about everything. So thanks for tuning in and listening to this. And hopefully it really has resonated with you, this idea of living a strong, fit, and healthy life. So as always, I want to thank you guys for listening to the show. If you haven't, please head over to Substance Nutrition, get a bag of Synthesis. This is the protein. We launched it in July that I formulated. It's a blend of whey protein isolate, micellar casein, a very clean label. Right now we only have vanilla, authentic vanilla. Recently got Informed Sport certification, so third-party certified to be free of over 250 banned substances. It's basically the banned substance list for any professional or international sport is basically covered by this. And that's been really important to the collegiate athletes who have started using it. Really, some elite high-level professional athletes have also started using synthesis. And so that certification is important, especially to them, so that they know what they're getting is clean and what's in the bag is on the label. But also for us, I would say us recreational athletes and youth and collegiate sports, I hear a lot, I'm on the sidelines and I'm in the gyms, and I get a lot from parents. How do we know what's good? How do we know what's not? And I think it's easy to say, oh, trust me. But with synthesis, we know trust is important, but we wanted to deliver it from a standpoint of credibility. So that's why we've gone through all the extra steps to make sure it is literally the best in class from ingredient, premium, purity, and quality standpoint. So you can get that at substancenutrition.com. We'll link it up in the show notes. And also we have the shirt. You saw my shirt today, Outlast the Temporary. So have another site called liveessentia.com. It started out just as a journal. I'm an avid reader, love reading. And it just started out kind of as a non-nutrition related journal. And with a friend of mine, and we started putting together apparel with slogans and designs that really spoke to this idea, like for the last show, of like, just keep going. How do we persevere through this stuff? How do we, set goals, fight procrastination, and move on? And as this shirt says, outlast the temporary. This could be a food craving, or this could be an uncomfortable situation in your life. But I'm a firm believer that, as Maya Angelou said, every storm runs out of rain. And so you just got to keep going. This t-shirt is a great reminder of that. We'll link it up in the show notes too. It's liveessentia.com. And right now we're running a promo where you can get the fall releases, or fall winter-ish releases. Buy 2 shirts, get 1 free. So you can get that at liveessentia.com. Everybody, thanks so much again for tuning in. We'll be back next week with a show. It's actually going to be a show about alcohol, the health benefits, but also the detriments, which is perfect, I think, for this kind of time of year when the alcohol flows a little bit more freely, so you can feel a little more informed about those decisions that you want to make. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next week.